Welcome to Bible Prophecy Revealed with Grant Jeffrey.
It's a delight to meet you tonight and to share with you the result of the intense research I've been doing for the last 5 years on a topic that is much in the news and will be for many years to come. It is a topic that deals with world government and global warming hype or exaggeration. What I have discovered, I want to share with you in the course of this program, I think will fascinate you and possibly even disturb you when we look at the underlying motivations of those that have pushed the global man-made warming agenda. The Bible tells us that in the last days there would be world government. We certainly see the move toward world government by the United Nations, by the various groups we've talked about in other programs, the Bilderbergers, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. These groups have an agenda. They believe in global government. They think of themselves as global citizens. They believe that it would be far better if we got rid of the individual nation state. But as we have found from history, that the nation state is the only place that can preserve our democratic freedoms and our traditions, our culture, and our history. There is a scientific hype or exaggeration that has been going on for the last 15 years toward the idea of man-made global warming. This has been pushed most effectively by former Vice President Al Gore, but also by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They have produced a hypothesis that mankind is going to cause, by our ever-increasing industrialization and the use of fossil fuels, will keep producing more and more carbon dioxide, and that as a basically global warming gas emissions will eventually heat the earth to the tipping point, and that then we will have rapidly rising temperatures throughout the climate. By the end of 2100, they believe that it might be as high as 7 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than it is today. That is the hypothesis. The reality is that while there has been some global warming in the last 200 years, we were coming out of the little ice age that ended around 1800. And yes, climate-wise, globally, world temperatures have increased about 1 degree Fahrenheit in each of the last 2 centuries. But that is something that mankind is totally capable of adapting to. That is not catastrophic nor likely to cause serious problems. What they're suggesting is something quite different. They're suggesting that because we are absolutely, for sure, increasing our carbon dioxide emissions, that eventually they will double in the latter part of this century. And the theory or hypothesis of the scientists that support this is that that will cause a rapid rise of temperature, and that the only thing we can do to avoid terrible seas rising, massive increases of temperature, causing droughts and famines and other things, is to rapidly decrease man-made emissions of carbon dioxide. We're going to come back to that and see whether it makes any sense. What I want you to know is that the idea behind man-made global warming is not scientifically neutral. We know that there's a group of about 40 scientists in the United States and in Europe that are very, very close to this topic. They are the scientists that are working with computer models, 4 huge supercomputers at universities, academic weather, and climate centers, 1 in England and 3 in America. These elite scientists are convinced and have attempted to convince the United Nations and mankind, and certainly have done a good job with the media, that the science is now settled, that nothing more has to be looked at. They have claimed that the climate temperature globally has been rising very, very rapidly, even through the last period from about 1960, rising all the way till now. However, new scientific release, when 4,000 computer files were released from East Anglia University called ClimateGate, they revealed a lot of significant data manipulation by these scientists, where they acknowledge privately that, in fact, in the last 11 years, since 1998, there has not been any rise in global temperatures, but in fact, there's been a decline of almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit. But this obviously does not suit the theory of man-made global warming, because during this time, obviously, fossil fuels continue to be used. Why then is it cooling? Well, their theory is that man-made carbon dioxide emissions are the primary factor affecting what the world's climate is. Other scientists, and there are many thousands of other scientists, disagree. The UN Intergovernmental Climate Control Group is about 2,500 people, scientists, some of them plastic surgeons, other people but not involved with climate, who agreed that this was a very real problem and had to be dealt with. In 1997, they formed the Kyoto Treaty in Japan. And though America did not sign it, the Senate would not ratify it. In fact, not one Democratic or Republican senator would sign it. This demanded radical reductions in the industrialization of Europe, Japan, and of course, North America. But the theory was based on the fact that the theory states that as we continue to manufacture carbon dioxide emissions, the temperature will inevitably go up. We asked some questions of scientists, and what we discovered is something quite different. For example, what we find is that the climate change that they're arguing about assumes that carbon dioxide is the major culprit. That is, in fact, not the case. If you look at all of the gases that contribute to the greenhouse effect, would you be surprised to know that of the 100% of gases that theoretically contribute to the greenhouse effect, the carbon dioxide from all sources amounts to only 3% of that greenhouse gas? And so even if all of carbon dioxide was to be eliminated from the world, well, first of all, we would starve. Because unlike the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States that claims that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, the truth of the matter is everything we eat depends ultimately on carbon dioxide. We are a carbon-based life system on this planet. And so it is ludicrous to say carbon dioxide is a pollutant. When we look at carbon dioxide, we find that only 3% of the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide. Over 95% are water vapor, and we can't do anything about water vapor. That's totally beyond the control of man. But think about this. Of the 3% of carbon dioxide that is part of greenhouse gases, how much of that do you think is made by mankind every year? Would you be shocked to know that 3% of the 3% of carbon dioxide annually is produced by humankind, by all our fossil fuel, coal plants, by all of our driving, by our oil sands and everything? We produce 3% of the 3% which composes the greenhouse gases. In other words, it's so minuscule that it is almost ludicrous to assume that this alone is responsible for their theoretical, hypothetical computer models that suggest that within 90 years, the temperature will rise between 7 and 10%. Imagine a large church, a huge church, filled with 100,000 balloons representing the atmosphere of this earth. How many of those 100,000 balloons, which would represent carbon dioxide, would there be? 381. And what percentage of that 381 would be produced by human activity? About 10%. In fact, when we look at carbon dioxide, you will be surprised to learn that cows, donkeys, and horses and sheep together produce more greenhouse gases annually than all the activities of humankind. When we look at termites, of which there are trillions, they are also producing more greenhouse gases than mankind. What then is the hidden motivation of the Al Gores of this world and those scientists who vehemently support man-made global warming? I think we can find the answer if we dig deep. If you listen to them and read their writings, as I have very assiduously, I discover that they are mostly very socialistic in their thinking politically. They are not really great defenders of capitalism or free enterprise. They tend to have a worldview in which it is necessary for intellectual elites and the leaders of the political class should in fact control the actions of their fellow citizens, of nations, of businesses. There is a view that they wish to have a control over everything, and I believe that they see man-made global warming as a pretext primarily to bring about a transference of our society into a massive socialist scheme. It goes further than that because they also are almost without exception supporters of global government. They wish to control America, Canada, Europe. They wish to control your actions as a businessman and as a citizen, even if the actual scientific facts do not support it. As I mentioned to you, since 1998, there has been, in fact, no increase in the last 11 years of global temperatures. In fact, it's gone down. It's been cooling 2 degrees. Scientists in Russia that study the climate actually believe that we are likely in the next 80 years to go into a cooling period, not warming. Many other scientists, some who have promoted global warming in the past, are now saying that they think we may be in for cooling, as we have been for the last 11 years, for at least another 2 or perhaps 3 decades. If this is correct, and initially the evidence seems to support this, why should we rush to destroy our economy and our industry for what is nothing more at this point than a theory? Scientists that have looked at this have said, even if we waited 20 more years to make sure that man-made global warming was true as a theory, it would not make that significant a change 90 years out from now, if their hypothesis and theory is correct. But if their hypothesis is wrong, if man-made increases of carbon dioxide, which no one disputes, are in fact taking place, then for us to crush our society and our industrialization to the point that we could not even feed the third world and we could not maintain our standards of living would be insanity of a major level. There's a massive exaggeration taking place about the dangers of man-made global warming. And when I began to look into this, I began to feel that they must have a hidden motivation. I believe, as I mentioned earlier, their political goals are nothing less than a socialistic worldview and a desire to achieve global government by frightening politicians and nations and citizens so that they are willing to give up their national independence and sovereignty, all to solve a problem which may or may not actually be a serious problem. Even if we continue to go by 1 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the next 90 years, that is not a problem that is insoluble in any way. Claims have been made by Al Gore and others that the sea is already rising. The answer by scientists like Lord Monckton, who was the science advisor to Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England, has indicated that there's no rise of the sea level. In fact, in some places in the Pacific, the sea level has actually dropped a little bit. Furthermore, they make wild claims that the Antarctic is melting away. Well, certainly there are some melting in the Antarctic, but it's a 2% peninsula of the Antarctic. 98% of the Antarctic is colder than it's been, and ice is as much as 6 to 8 miles deep. When we look at Greenland, knowing that Antarctica is about 90% of all the ice in this world, and Greenland is another 6%, and the fact is that Greenland is in a kind of a stone bowl where most of the ice could not melt into the sea if it wanted to, we're left with the Canadian Arctic, The Canadian Arctic does in fact melt, sometimes more and sometimes less in the summers. But when Al Gore was saying just a few months ago that the Arctic ice in Canada and above Alaska was the smallest it's been in 28 years, within 3 months of his statement, it was at the highest level it's been in 28 years. There's variability. Men actually went through with ships in the 1960s through the Northwest Passage when it was virtually ice-free. What we know is the climate is extremely complex, far more complex than can be modeled by a supercomputer at this stage of science understanding of the climate. We look at global warming. What is the agenda? For example, I found in the early 90s, the Club of Rome actually stated in a booklet, the first global revolution. Now remember, the Club of Rome is an elite group of politicians who absolutely were committed to world government for the last 30 years. The Club of Rome wrote this paper in the early 90s called The First Global Revolution that clearly outlines their plans to use global warming to stampede humanity toward their hidden goal, which is nothing less than global government. Let me quote you what their statement says, and this is their own word for word. Quote, "In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself." This is the report, The First Global Revolution by the Club of Rome, written by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider in 1993, page 75. How's that for a smoking gun? Back in 1993, they say that we have to stampede mankind toward global government. And we've got to come up with a problem, and because people love the environment and the planet, why would they not? Then let's come up with this, and let's say mankind has to make those changes to save humanity from man-made global warming. What does the Bible have to say about this? Well, when I was looking and doing my research on man-made global warming, it struck me that the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, he says, "Who changed the truth of God into a lie." What is the truth of God? That God is a benevolent creator of this planet, that he created it in a self-regulating manner, that when it heats up, evaporation gets more, cloud cover increases, and it oscillates and begins to cool down. He says, "Who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." Worshiping the creature or the creation rather than the Creator. Does that remind you of something? The fact that many of these global warming enthusiasts talk about the Gaia spirit of all the planet, that the earth is a spirit in and of itself. Think about those who are global warming enthusiasts who argue that in order to have a sustainable environment and a sustainable humanity, we need to reduce the population of the earth to only 1 billion people. Well, I don't know any way you can do that short of genocide. Why would people who propose that they love humanity and love the earth propose reducing the population of this planet by 5/6? I believe there is an agenda here, and there's an agenda where they have fallen in love with the creation, the earth, and its natural creatures of all kinds, including trees and animals, fish, birds, but really have lost sight of the value of humanity that was created in the image of God. Is man-made global warming real? The jury's still out. I would not propose as a non-scientist to say that all the science is in, but I can tell you that while 2,500 people signed the United Nations Intergovernmental Climate Control studies that suggest there's a real problem, do you know that over 31,000 climate scientists have signed the actual Oregon petition, in which 31,000 scientists, of which 9,000 plus are PhDs, who claim that they, in their own scientific area, have not seen evidence of global warming yet. In light of the fact that a vast majority of those scientists who are best equipped educationally and by their own experience to understand the complexities of the climate field, and in light of the fact that our weather people cannot even predict accurately what the weather will be 2 weeks out, to believe that computer models at a supercomputer university could absolutely determine what the climate of the entire planet will be 90 years from now seems a bit of a stretch. In light of what is going on, I believe we need to wake up. We need to look at the evidence, and there are numerous sites on the internet and in books that you can look into the argument, because one of the things I have noted is that the philosophy of man-made global warming, in fact, is one that appears to be against the idea of a creator and against the idea of freedom and of the nation state, which God has endorsed not only throughout history, but the Lord tells us in the words of the prophet Zechariah that the nation state will continue not only through the whole millennium, but the representatives of the nation will come up to visit and worship the King, the Messiah, forever in the new earth to come. The nation state is part of God's plan for mankind. And therefore, global government, I do not believe, is part of God's permanent good plan for mankind. Although the Bible does tell us in the book of Revelation 13 and Daniel 7 and numerous other places that there will be world government in the last generation, when Israel would come back in the land, as it did in 1948, when the revived Roman Empire will be created in the area of Europe and the Mediterranean, as it has. The real motive, is it to reduce global warming and temperature in 90 years? I don't think so, and let me tell you why. I've read the Kyoto Treaty signed in 1997 by a multitude of nations. If the nations voluntarily reduce their carbon dioxide emissions, which would mean to deindustrialize, to close power plants, to reduce the use of fossil fuels, to reduce mining and many other things that would make them unable to maintain the standard of living of their people and would make them unable to help the third world, what then would happen? What I found is that if every nation did all that it said and reduced its carbon dioxide emissions as the Kyoto Treaty demanded, their reduction in global temperature, according to the computers, would be less than a couple of degrees 90 years from now. So small, we might not even be able to measure it and know where any good came of it at all. In light of this, I think if you look at what the global warming enthusiasts have to say, you will find that they do not focus on the end result so much as on the means, because they desire to reduce the industrialization of the West. Do you know that in the Copenhagen Treaty negotiations that took place in December of 2009, that are scheduled to resume in 2010 in December in Mexico City, in fact, I've read the language of the proposed treaty. Clause 31, subparagraph B, actually states that the industrialized nations of the West and of Japan will agree, if they sign this treaty, to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions to the level of only 5% of what we were emitting in 1990, and that we would do this in the next 40 years. Let me repeat that. If our governments had signed the Copenhagen Treaty, proposed language, we would have agreed to commit industrial and economic suicide. We would have agreed to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions to only 5% of what they were in 1990, and we'd do it in the next 40 years. We would not have an oil sands. We would not have fossil fuel coal plants. We would not be able to produce petroleum-based fertilizer to feed the third world. The next clause said that we would voluntarily give up to $100 billion a year to the third world, and that we do so annually, and it would rise every year thereafter. No wonder there is a global warming industry composed of intellectual elites, composed of scientists who, if they want to get grants and they want to get tenure, they support global warming, and governments throw out the money to them every single day. But if anyone stands up and even questions the science, no matter how qualified they are, they end up being attacked. They often have lost their tenure, and they certainly do not get government grants for future studies. In the light of this situation, I think we have to realize that the agenda of those who enthusiastically support global warming, of which their data manipulation has now been revealed for all to study, that many newspapers, for example, the Wall Street Journal, the UK Daily Telegraph, the Canadian National Post, numerous other newspapers and magazines are now beginning to question the exaggerated claims of those who claim that mankind must commit industrial suicide. We must pay hundreds of billions of dollars every year to the third world as some kind of climate debt because we decided to industrialize before they did. Naturally, those who hope to receive billions, corrupt governments in the third world that have used all Western aid corruptly in the past, would naturally be thrilled. But I think we need to be very wise in how we move forward, because our freedom and our capitalism, our free enterprise, and our integrity as worshipers of God is at stake. Much more research needs to be done. And it is my prayer that now that the lid has been lifted on some of the scientific manipulation of data, that there will be a brand new look at the scientific situation, that science and government and citizens can make an honest decision as to what we should do regarding the climate going ahead. God bless you.
My latest book is Shadow Government. It documents the global elite plan to destroy America and our freedom and privacy. It documents the surveillance society that now exists, that is watching your emails, your internet surfing, and your phone. You need to understand the surveillance society that is now attacking our American freedoms. I encourage you to get Shadow Government. It'll open your eyes to the reality that now exists throughout our world today.
Hello, we're Joel.